Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cauldron. I am Lisa Keogh, and I am joined by my three lovely co-hosts, Denise Findlay, Claire Samani, and Marion Calder. I hope you're all well, and I'm going to come to you first, Marion. How has your week been?
How has my week been? There's been an interesting week, to say the least. I think my weekend was very interesting, but at some point we'll touch on that in the future. But it's been a busy week, shall we say, for women, especially in Edinburgh. There are various places I would like to be able to recommend that you could go to in Edinburgh during the festival, and there's some that maybe I will review at some point in the future. But on that note, moving on from the past weekend, one thing I'd really like to bring up is the announcement on the cooperation agreement between the SNP and the Greens that was announced last Friday. Now, there was multiple aspects that were brought up, but the one thing I would like to kind of point out was the announcement by Nicola Sturgeon of a bill to be introduced within the year on GRA reform. Now, we can't say that we weren't expecting this, we kind of were, and the fact that the SNP were kind of aligning with the Greens, this was to be expected. However, for the fact that they've actually put this on the first year of business, it blows my mind, to be quite frank. To be looking at kind of our economic recovery, the drug deaths that have been in the kind of press recently, our failure in kind of educational standards, which has been on year and year, that the Scottish Government has chosen to focus on this bill, albeit very important for women, that actually focuses on a very small minority of Scottish people as such. But for those who are watching this, and many people won't know what the heck this means, this is a bill that's actually coming in to introduce a kind of form of self-identification. It's to reform the GRA Act, which allows a change of your birth certificate to change your sex. Yeah, I know many people are going, I'm sorry, but how is this allowed to actually happen? Who is allowed to change their sex in the birth certificate? At the time when it was brought in, at 2004, we didn't have same-sex marriage, and we didn't have the same equality in age regarding pension rights. So there was various pieces of legislation and acts throughout even Europe that thought this is wrong. So this is the GRA 2004 is a Westminster Act, but however is actually no longer reserved, it's evolved, so the Scottish Government can change it. So in their absolute superb stupidity, Scottish Government have actually decided to actually reform this, and actually we're waiting to see what this bill will actually look like. But what they were discussing prior to this was dropping down to the age of 16 to allow anyone to self-ID. This is the opportunity to actually change sex, change your birth certificate. So it's open to anyone. So this has removed the medical diagnosis for those who would be perceived as transsexual before. So there's very small, tiny percentage of the public that would need this. To actually anyone at all will be allowed to actually, after 3 months, to be able to just change their name, their birth certificate, open to all. And yet, Scottish Government refuses to engage with women's groups, as in like us, for Women Scotland, about why we're concerned about this, and also kind of wider ranging about why are you actually not kind of realising that changing your birth certificate and being allowed to change everything is possibly someone just might take advantage of this. We're not talking about transgender people, we're actually just talking about people themselves. Will possibly take advantage of being able to hide. Now, although the Scottish Government have said that if they find that anyone has used this for nefarious purposes, as in fraudulent, but when I say fraudulent, meaning fraudulent money-wise, not actually fraudulently pretending to be the opposite sex, they will take action. But if you actually seriously think this through, how can that be? Because how could you possibly prove that that fraudulent individual generally didn't think that they were opposite sex? So it's absolutely nonsense. The whole thing is nonsense. The fact that they're choosing to take away kind of a medical diagnosis leaves trans individuals, transsexuals, without any form of support. You're actually moving straight into a change without any medical support. Now, I know they did say within the definition that they would maybe perhaps look to establish maybe more resources into gender recognition clinics, gender identity clinics rather. However, why them and not others? We're talking about mental health condition, which is gender dysphoria. Surely they'd be looking at this for across the spectrum, especially as we're coming out of COVID. So this is such a mess, to be quite frank. They haven't published the findings of the last public consultation, albeit ourselves and other groups have requested that they do so. They're storming ahead with this. We don't understand why. We cannot see whom it really benefits. It doesn't benefit, why I'm losing my voice. Excuse me. It doesn't benefit women. It certainly does not benefit women. It doesn't benefit kind of children. So why the heck are they doing this? And I've never been able to find an answer to this in any form of way. It absolutely makes no sense. Of all the things that Scottish Government could be considering at the moment in time, this should be way down the line, and especially since it impacts so hugely on women's rights. But yeah, I'm a bit annoyed about that. That's my week.
Well, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to add in there when you said about the 3-month transition sort of period to show that you know, I was looking at Mermaid's website today, and actually they're calling for the Scottish Government to remove that 3-month period as well. So anyway, Denise, what have you got to say about this? What are your thoughts on this tonight?
You're asking why are the Scottish Government doing this? And it seems like Nicola Sturgeon is determined to push this through. And I think it's partly because she can brook no opposition. So because a year or so ago, she tried to do it, she made promises to people within the party, and particularly people from groups within the party, which were the Out for Indie group and the Young Scots for Independence group and the SME students group. So she made these promises, and then she got opposition. So the first GRA consultation, the first opposition to what she was trying to do. When she gets opposition, she will double down. So now she sees that as a threat to her authority. So she's determined to push this through. But what she needed was to shut the opposition up, because she couldn't, she can't win the argument. She couldn't win the argument in GRA. And if the argument on GRA gets out there into the public, then she will be beaten on it. I mean, people will be furious. Nobody wants this if they understand the consequences. So what she did was really, and I knew the minute I seen Humza Yousaf announce his hate crimes bill, I knew exactly why he was announcing a hate crimes bill. The purpose of the hate crimes bill is to shut us up on GRA. This is typical behavior of Nicola Sturgeon, because she wants to do something. It's a stupid idea because she hasn't thought it through. She gets opposition, but instead of tacking a bit and kind of changing and backing off, she doubles down, and she now has to force her will through. This is why she's gone into the deal with Harvey, because she doesn't entirely trust her MSPs to be as unprincipled and stupid as her. So she thinks she might need the Greens as this extra ballast, you know, a little extra support for her. So she brings in the hate crimes bill. The hate crimes bill does not protect women from misogyny, but it does mean that trans, or anyone actually, they don't have to be trans, can report women for hate speech. Now, the SNP have a definition of transphobia, and the definition of transphobia would preclude you referring to the biological sex of a trans woman. That's transphobia, according to the SNP. It would also preclude you talking about predators that have taken advantage of self-ID to access women and have committed crimes, sex crimes. That would also be transphobia, according to the SNP's definition of transphobia. Now, do Police Scotland, that definition of transphobia, is it law? Well, it isn't law, but all that really needs to happen is for a complainant to get a Police Scotland officer, and we know how captured Police Scotland are by the trans lobby, and the police in general are captured by them, to get a police officer to take the complaint seriously, and the woman will be investigated and could end up in court. So the hate crimes bill is, to my mind, deliberately, there's no other reason for that hate crimes bill. All the other things are already covered by various other pieces of legislation that cover all the other protected characteristics and hate directed towards them. And people were like, why are you bringing this bill? They're bringing this bill to cause a chilling effect on women, to shut women up, to stop us speaking, and to put us in threat. The bill is a direct violation, I would say, of our Article 10 rights. It is against the right of free expression. It produces a chilling effect on women when women are frightened to speak out. Now, during the passage of the bill, Humza Yousaf initially accepted an amendment to the bill that would have given women a minor amount of protection. However, the trans people within the Greens and the SNP, through a massive row, called the SNP transphobic, left the SNP to join the Greens, and Nicola Sturgeon made a pleading video for them to, oh, we'll fix things, come back. You know, she's never made a pleading video to women that have left. She's never said a word to women. Women have pleaded with her. Women have written her a letter and signed it, and she's ignored women. But the minute the trans were up and out, she was on their video pleading on the national news. Humza, of course, backed down. He didn't take that through. He backed down with that amendment. So then Joanne Lamont, who has been fantastic for women, absolutely fantastic, and she is such a loss to the Scottish Parliament, and I just hope that she's going to be back into politics, because she was the light in the darkness of the Scottish Parliament for us. One of the lights. we had some others, but it was few and far between. She brought forward an amendment where she was going to list the things that we would be allowed to say, that women would be allowed to say, and she wanted Humza Yousaf to include that in his bill, but he didn't include it in his bill. He refused that as well. So the bill is actually a direct threat to women, is a threat to all of us, to every single one of us. And the bill's purpose is to stop us speaking out against the GRA reform. And make no mistake, GRA reform and what Nicola Sturgeon is buying into with Patrick Harvey is an ideology, is a queer theory ideology. It has its mantras, it has its purity tests, it brooks no debate. No civil rights movement would ever shut down debate and say no debate. Civil rights depends on free expression. Democracy depends on free expression, because you have to make your argument. This queer theory ideology is not a civil rights movement. It's the opposite. It's a repressive ideological regime. It's similar to McCarthyism, communism, and also the religious fundamentalism that we see in states in the Middle East. The government, a quote from Harry Truman, once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, and this is what Nicola Sturgeon's government has committed to. They've committed to silencing the voice of opposition. There is only one way to go, and it's down the path of increasingly repressive measures. That's more women being arrested, more women threatened by police for chalk slogans, until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. Now, there's some women that live in fear already, and it's only going to get worse. So we have to fight this repressive ideology, and women are being abused in Scotland. We are being oppressed and abused. We are being told what we are allowed to think and say, and we are being told what we are allowed to say about ourselves. That's abuse. It's coercive control. That's what the Scottish Government is doing to us.
On that note of abuse, the grooming crimes in Scotland are up by 80% for the past 5 years. It's now the highest it's ever been on record in Scotland. So between April 2020 and March 2021, there were 685 offences alone. But back in 2015 and 16, there was only 381, which is obviously still too much. They shouldn't have been there. But it's just, the jump is quite staggering. Claire, I'm going to come over to you next and see what you've got to say, because I'm sure you'll have something to say on this.
Yes, so I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about stereotypes, and there's also been a new book released by Sean Fay, which has been reviewed by a few people on Twitter who I follow. And actually, if anyone is interested, these 3 accounts are really excellent. One is at Still Tish, at Including Girls, and Lily Maynard. So this TRA, Sean Fay, this book covers, you know, quite a generational gap. It starts off with a 90-year-old man who has recently come out as transgender and now is on hormones, estrogen, dressing as a woman, and, you know, is living as a woman, which is fine. He's an autogynephile, and, you know, good luck to him, you know, that's fantastic. But my issue is the other end of the scale, because the book also talks about, you know, how young is too young to be trans. And increasingly we're seeing, you know, very young children, 3-4 years old, who are allegedly coming out as transgender. And I have a huge issue with that. I mean, there was actually a recent case in Lancashire with foster carers, and I think they had 3 children, not related, biologically unrelated, and they all 3 children came out as transgender. Now, you know, this is crazy. You've got in Scottish schools now, you know, you've got children receiving basically a transgender education, and that's from primary age. And children are very susceptible to this sort of thing. You know, they're highly influenced by their teacher. You know, they believe what their teachers are saying, and they've no reason not to accept what is being sold to them. And what I think is, if we start affirming children, as school and our parents, if we're all affirming these children in their ideas that have been introduced to them, that they might be in the wrong body, and maybe they're a girl when they're actually a boy, etc. And we socially transition those children, that's going to lead, where does that lead? That leads to puberty blockers, that leads to wrong sex hormones, and ultimately surgery. But it is a medical pathway for life. And I just think we should all be very, very concerned, you know, about that. And as Marion and Denise have said, you know, with the GRA reform, the hate crime bill, it will become completely impossible to even speak about this stuff, and children will get younger and younger. I mean, actually, in the Fay book, there is actually, and I forget his name, Dr. Diane Ehrensaft, that person actually believes that pre-verbal children can actually give indications that they are transgender. Now, where are we going? Where are we going with all of that? And if you think about a number of children that there's been like this huge increase in trans-identified children, where does that come from? If that's not come from it being introduced in schools with the increased indoctrination from social media, etc., how can we explain this? Now, this this Faye person, says that they're actually asserting that suddenly thousands of kids have found the words to express themselves after centuries of silence. Now, to me, if that's true, where are all the female middle-aged transitioners? Because there aren't any. The records are showing it's mostly young boys who maybe, are rejecting the whole sort of macho, be strong, etc. Stereotypes that are put on them from a young age. So maybe young effeminate boys, teenage girls who are obviously, I think, terrified at the sexual expectations and stereotype limiting things that they've got to put up with as girls. And then you've got middle-aged men, white men mostly, who are transitioning in middle age and frankly getting everything they could ever wish for handed to them on a plate by the government. And that's not even considering the men that are not transgender potentially, but who are using and abusing the system to gain entry to places. Sex offenders, for example, they're having either sentences reduced, and then the sentences they are having, they're spending in the female estate, and females are being abused by them. That cannot be right. It's just not right. And I just can't believe that now we're going to be stopped from even talking about it.
Claire, I was just going to ask you if you could give us just a bit of a definition on the AGP. You'd obviously mentioned it and you didn't explain what it was, and some of the people watching might not know.
That is a man who may not be attracted to women, but want the identity of a woman, and they get sexual gratification from dressing as a woman and being seen as a woman and as being validated as a woman. And nowhere in any of all this stuff do we see any consideration at all for women. All of these things are coming in, are changes to school, all this indoctrination to children. What about girls? They have a right to privacy in bathrooms, for goodness sake. Look at what happened in Cauldron. That all went through. That was basically the toilets were made mixed sex, no consultation with parents. They came back to school. All the children were pretty much traumatized, and that was boys and girls, because boys don't want to be in toilets. Most boys don't want to be in toilets with girls. Huge furore. And they've backtracked on it. That should be telling the government all they need to know about what normal, decent people think of this gender ideology.
Thank you, Claire. Actually, while we're still speaking about children, I want to touch on something. I have been looking at Mermaid's website for the past sort of day or so, and what I found when I was looking on it is they've got an exit button. So you press this exit button and it just totally navigates you away from their website, like some kind of dirty little secret. And they also recommend that if you're using an email address to correspond with them, that you make one up so that your parent or carer does not have access to it. So for me, they obviously know they shouldn't be doing this with children, and they are also encouraging our children to lie to us, as well as obviously the Scottish government. So yeah, I was quite worried about that, actually. Marion, I'm going to come back over to you and see what your sort of final thoughts are this evening.
Well, yeah, just talking back to the school thing, is I was very heartened to actually see the pushback from the parents in Highlands Islands and the school, and it just shows you what you can do when parent power gets together. So go parents, and in Cauldron, and I'm aware of other schools and other areas where parents are getting together and actually pushing back against their council. So well done, more of it, and it does show what can actually happen. And just to touch on what you said there, Lisa, mermaids actually kind of state that they are just like NSPCC or various other kind of charity-based sites that have exit buttons, so that, because they're a help group. I'm not really quite sure how kind of a charity that kind of puts kids on a medical pathway can ever be considered a kind of a help group. So, but yeah, that's the reason why they say they have that exit button. But as you say, they also have this kind of, have another different email you don't have to tell your parents. Will be your new family. Very concerning. So, yeah, I know, as always, don't forget, Thursday, September the 2nd, rally outside Parliament. I'm going to say it all the day, every day, until we get there.
Yeah, I also wanted to quickly mention about the rainbow police cars. Now, for me, obviously, the police should not be endorsing this. We shouldn't be politicising the police and the NHS. We should not be using these rainbow lanyards, rainbow police cars. I assume when I see a policeman or I see a nurse or a doctor, I assume that they're all inclusive. I assume that they don't care what I am or who I am. They're going to treat me or they're going to look after me. It shouldn't matter my sexuality, my colour, anything. As living that job, as doing that job for the public service, I assume they care about me. I assume they care about everyone. So politicising this has just really bothered me this week, because you just know it's coming to Scotland next. Denise, over to you.
Okay, so I have one good thing to say. My great new hero, Sharar Ali, for the Green Party, has again proven himself to be like a fantastic guy, because today he put a tweet, and obviously I won't mention the case, but he was in support of women, very, very strongly in support of women, and very brave where other politicians have feared to tread. So I know, like, it's the England and Wales Greens, but it is this light of hope that there are people that in positions of power and possibly will be the leader of the Greens that are willing to speak up for women. So that was my ray of light. And of course, the Inverness School was another ray of light, which shows you can fight back. And I do believe we can fight back, but the councillors are up for election in May. So the councillors are the people to frighten. So we should be writing to them and pressurising them and saying if they do introduce any of this nonsense coming from the Scottish government, then we won't be voting for them.
And Claire, have you got any sort of final thoughts this evening?
Yeah, so I think for me, the sort of main problem with this ideology in school is the fact that it absolutely does rely on stereotypes. I mean, actually the STA acknowledges that stereotypes are relevant to being transgender. It's almost like in order to be taken seriously, it's like a performance of gender. And, I just think that is basically gaslighting an entire school population into, basically saying, well, pretending that something is not what it is. This is a medical pathway for your children for the rest of their lives, and for no other reason other than health. This ideology should not be being sold to children as something as a thing. Let adults do what they want, but let's leave our children alone to be educated and not indoctrinated.
I actually think mermaids would disagree with you, because they have said that transition in children under 16 will not have a negative effect, and we need to recognise every trans person regardless of age. My final note is to remember the demonstration on the 2nd of September as well. I think we need to get as many people there as possible, so I look forward to seeing all of you there. So on that note, good night, folks.